The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Tuesday night. Hope everybody's having a fantastic week so far and ready for the rest of the week. All right. So, second show today, and we're going to be talking about big topic today. What is Western civilization? Is it anything? Can it be defined? Can it be categorized? What does it refer to? What is characteristic of Western versus non-Western? Given that the West is so varied and there's so much going on, can we even characterize something uniquely Western? And when did it start? When did this Western civilization come about? And I've talked about this in the past, but I think this is one of those topics where you can talk about it forever because there's so much to say. It's worth repeating. There's so much confusion and misunderstandings about it. And I'm reading a new book. I'm reading a book on the culture of growth. Really a book that deals with what I think from a historical perspective, if you're interested in history, I think the most important question in history to answer is, why did we get so rich? How did we get so rich? Why did we get so rich? Why did all this start at the beginning of the 19th century or the end of the 18th century? Where did this come from? What are the origins of all this? Economic growth is not a phenomenon known in history. People say history repeats itself. No, it doesn't. We've never had an industrial revolution before. We've never had economic growth before. We've never had wealth before. So something new happened at the beginning of the 19th century, late 18th century. And I think the most important question to ask is, why did it happen? And what characterizes it? Anyway, there have been a lot of books about it. There are a lot of theories about it. Of course, Deirdre McCluskey has a whole series of books, 3 books actually, that deal with this in great detail. And I picked up this book called the Culture of Growth, A Culture of Growth, that basically makes the argument that the origins of this are cultural. The culture changed in a particular way that caused what is to come. And the book is fascinating. Parts of it a little academic, but generally the book is fascinating. I'm really enjoying it. It tells this amazing story, and it's focused on what probably is the most interesting and important period of human history, maybe, and that is the period from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment, 1500 to 1700 approximately. And I think this is the defining period of Western civilization. I think this is, and then into the 1700s, the Enlightenment itself. This is where this period between 1500 and 1700 are setting the foundations for Western civilization, and then Western civilization really gets defined and focused in during the 18th century, during the Enlightenment. The name of the book is A Culture of Growth. Here, one second. I'll tell you the author's name. It's Joel something. Why is this not? There it is. It's called A Culture of Growth, and it's by Joel. I can't pronounce this name. It's Mokyr. Mokyr. So it's called A Culture of Growth, The Origins of the Modern Economy. He's an economist. I'm listening to it. Most of the books now I listen to. I don't particularly like the woman who reads it. She's too fast and she doesn't slow down for like paragraph breaks. It's just one long flow. But the book is fascinating. Really, really interesting stuff. If you're interested in the scientific revolution, if you're interested in how cultures change, I know everybody has opinions about cultural change, but if you're interested in specifically, how actually cultures change, then this is a fascinating book, and I think gives a really good indication of what causes culture decay, the kind of networks, the kind of relationships, the kind of work that causes culture change. And I'll probably talk more about that book in the future. Anyway, so the book got me thinking, and I've got this thesis. I'm sure it's not originally mine. I got this from Ayn Rand, Elena Peikoff, and so on. But about the origins of Western civilization, what the term means. I've talked about it in a number of different talks. I talked about it in my conversation with Douglas Murray that we had, where I don't think we quite agreed on what Western civilization was, which again is I think important and powerful, because almost nobody agrees with me about Western civilization. I remember once I was invited to this seminar on Western civilization, on why we're losing, why Western civilization is in decline, and it was basically conservatives. It was all conservatives from different think tanks in Washington, D.C. It had some academics. I mean, it had some big names. I can't remember who was there, but it had big names. I remember there were big names, people I know, have read, respect to some extent. And this is before the right went all crazy and collectivist and everything. So this is at a better time. It was the same week that I was at the NSA. So I don't know. This is 8 years ago, 9 years ago. Or whenever Snowden was. It was just after Snowden, about 6 months after Snowden. Anyway, I was in this seminar, and the debate was about Western civilization, and I made the point, well, you have to define Western civilization. You have to identify what it is that we're talking about, because nobody here is defining it. It's mushy and up in the air, and what is it? And then I defined it, and I talked about who I think the enemies of Western civilization are, and oh my God, they didn't know what to do with me. I think they were embarrassed that anybody invited me to this seminar. They didn't want to take me head on, because I don't think they had really anything to say. But it was just crazy. You could see like the shock, the disbelief. They'd never heard anything like this before. Anyway, so there's a lot, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, and there's a lot to say about this. So when does Western civilization, if Western civilization is something special, if Western civilization is the kind of civilization that we have today, characterized by freedom and some levels of freedom, characterized by economic prosperity, economic growth, it has a unique characteristic that where you can say, well, Western civilization is like the best. It's superior to other civilization. It's unique. It's a civilization others want to emulate. And I think, at least until recently, you could say that, and people were emulating it. So what is it? And when did that start? When did that phenomena start? Because if you go back to the Middle Ages, right? If you go back to the Middle Ages, if you go back to, the beginning of the Renaissance, the 1450s even. So this is Renaissance already. Beginning of the Renaissance. What is special about Western civilization? And really, in most respects, nothing. I mean, it's a Christian civilization. It's the civilization in the West is a Christian civilization. In Europe, in Italy, in Spain, in France, in Germany, in England. I mean, this is all what we consider the West. America, of course, doesn't exist. And so Western civilization at this point is it's not really a civilization. There's nothing special about it. It's Christian. It's poor. Indeed, at this point in history, it's probably poorer than the Ottoman Empire, which is winning most military confrontations with what you would call the West. I will get to Japan being the West or South Korea being the West. We'll get to that. Of course, they are, I think, part of Western civilization. But I think there's value in calling a Western civilization to anchor it historically. It is a civilization that has evolved out of Western Europe and ultimately the United States, but primarily Western Europe. So if you go back to the 1400s, China's more advanced, many respects richer, more innovative, superior technology, a real powerhouse. I think if somebody looked at the map of the world and said, who is going to be the most advanced civilization in the future, who is going to be the most successful, independent of a deep understanding of philosophy and its role in history, I think you would probably say China. Even India had kind of a civilization, certainly wealth, certainly the ability to produce large quantities, for example, of garments, of fabric, from an industrial perspective, from the wealth perspective, from perspective, even an aesthetic perspective, from a building perspective. I mean, yes, the Christians had built these magnificent cathedrals, churches, but other than that, nothing. And even there, not clear that any of these cathedrals really could match the Parthenon or the Colosseum, which is in their past. So you come across a place in Europe that is, it's advancing. Certainly at the beginning of the Renaissance, something is happening, something is changing. But it's not clear that this change is going to be dramatic. It's not clear that this change is going to propel this particular part of the world into the wealth and riches and culture and art and success that the future centuries will manifest. Again, the Ottomans look richer, building projects just as big, just as impressive. Chinese, Indians, all building civilizations that seem to have better prospects than anything happening in Europe. And yet, within 400 years, by 1900, and certainly even by 1800, but certainly by 1900, Western civilization is civilization. Western civilization is the richest, most prosperous, most innovative, most exciting, most dynamic, most aesthetically beautiful civilization on planet Earth, and there's no doubt anymore of the potential success of what is going on in Europe. And the real question is what happens during those really 300 years from 1500 to 1800 that makes that possible? What are the key points? What are the key moments in this? And what are the ideas that come out of this period that really solidify a new, completely new civilization? And I think that certainly early on, the two things that are going on. One is an aesthetic revolution. And here it's a revolution, maybe it's not as much a revolution as it is a renaissance. A discovery of Greek art, a discovery of Roman art, a discovery of beauty, but with an emphasis on the beauty of the human form, the beauty of the human spirit, and an artist's ability to replicate that, to manifest, to project that, to recreate that. In some sense, Michelangelo's David, and I know I always talk about Michelangelo's David, but I think it's a seminal piece in all of human civilization. Michelangelo's David is the declaration of a civilization. Michelangelo's David is an identification of something new, something not Christian, something, a challenge really to Christianity, a challenge to everything that came before it. Michelangelo's David is an individual, a unique individual, a powerful individual, not cowering before God, not cowering before gargoyles, not cowering before monsters, not being eaten by a snake, not be, if you know the famous Greek sculpture of the father and the sons, being strangled by snakes. No, this is a heroic man of confidence, of self-esteem, of determination, of focus. This is a new era where individuals matter. Not just collectives, not just groups, not just masses, but individuals. Well, not many, but suddenly individuals are standing up for themselves. So the art begins to reflect a certain individualization, individuality. Individuals matter. Individuals are heroic. And I think you see that in the art first, before there's any articulation of that idea. It is the artists picking it up through, I guess, a sense of life from the Greek and Roman sculptures they are seeing. And this happens before Michelangelo. It happens with Donatello, but Michelangelo takes it the next level, certainly with his David, but even with his dying slaves who are so uniquely individual and so struggling as individual human beings. They're not bromides. And again, they're not cowering. They might be cowering before their own challenges, before their own internal conflicts, but they're not cowering before God. They're not cowering before anything. So you get a certain, I think, sense of life. You get a certain confidence and a certain individual, I wouldn't even say individualism yet, because it hasn't gotten to that point, but a certain respect for the individual. And this is happening in Italy during the Renaissance, and it's happening I think in the Netherlands, where merchants are becoming rich through trade, and they're enjoying that wealth. And again, the art, if you look at the portraiture, if you look at still lives of the period, you see again individuation, you see again celebration of human success, of human wealth. So something is changing. It's no longer religion at the center of everything. Suddenly, maybe the sculptures, the subjects are religious because that's what you have to do and that's what's expected by the authorities. But artists are using that in order to project new themes, new identities, new individuals. I mean, think of Mona Lisa even, or think of the Mona Lisa, or again, think of Michelangelo's Pietà. Yeah, it's Jesus and Mary, but who cares? It's a very individuated Jesus. It's a heroic son who has died and a mother who mourns the death of her child. It's universal. And it's individual. And it affects you as an individual. So there's this artistic stream that is bringing in, and to some extent to the masses, because you get here a this art is available to a lot of people in churches, in public squares. So it's affecting the culture. Suddenly people seeing human beings as individuals, not as just tools, for the church, tools for God. But some people who are achieving things, people who emote, people who feel, people who care, people with individual characters. So the art is projecting a certain individuality, and you see this throughout the art of the period. That's one trend that is happening. Of course, the second is, again, a trend that, again, is inspired by the ancients. But it's scientists. Scientists are starting to explore nature, starting to study nature, publish their works. You have a Copernican revolution with Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler. You have Francis Bacon, who is, I think, according to this book, and I think true, is a key figure in the Renaissance and a key figure in the scientific revolution that is to come. That here are people starting to explain the world, and Francis Bacon is saying science should be used for practical purposes. Science should be used to improve human life. Science can be used for technology. In the past, science was just for the sake of science, for the sake of contemplation. I mean, that is the ideal. Even in Aristotle, ultimately, it's an ideal to contemplate, not to be practical. But Francis Bacon brings it down to practicality. And his science, his theory, he's not a very good scientist, but his theory, as far as I can tell, his theory is inductive. We learn from nature. We learn by inducing from nature. We learn through experimentation. It's facts, it's reality, it's the primacy of existence. And what happens during this period is just an explosion of artistic exploration, which ultimately culminates in the late 1600s with Isaac Newton. But it's 200 years, from 1500 to 1700, people engaged in investigating, in experiments, in trying, in testing, in pushing the envelope, and getting in trouble, as Galileo does, and as others do. But pushing and pushing the envelope, testing the limits of what the religious and political authorities would let them get away with. But it is an era of discovery, and an era in which, and this is what the book really focuses on, which I think is amazing. The book, Culture of Growth, which I talked about at the beginning of the show, focuses on this period from 1500 to 1700 on the individuals. It primarily focuses on Bacon and Newton as the two prime movers. But it also focuses on the network, what's called, what is it called now? Something of letters. The Academy of Letters? I think it's the Academy of Letters. Anyway, he talks about the network of hundreds, and at some points thousands, of people all over Europe interested in science, interested in philosophy, and many of the philosophers were also scientists, and scientists philosophers, who were constantly writing to each other. And then journals were started, and publishing in the journals, and then books were written, and printing presses and publishers were created. Remember, this is also the period in which the printing press is invented. And now these ideas can be put down in writing, replicated very easily, hundreds of copies sent out. This is a period of philosophy, an explosion in philosophical thinking. You could argue how good the philosophical thinking is, but it's an explosion in philosophy, in people asking questions, deep questions, important questions, the questions of life and death, the questions that matter. So from 1500 on, you get an explosion of scientific activity and philosophical activity, mathematical activity. Whereas before 1500, most of science and mathematics came from India and from the Arab world, and even China. Technology certainly came from China. And suddenly you get this explosion of science and math and philosophy and thinking and exploration and new ideas and testing them out and people writing to each other and critiquing each other's work and challenging each other. I mean, the idea of peer review, which is now criticized, of course, in our culture, came about during this period. As people are writing journals and people are submitting ideas and papers about scientific discoveries. Well, how do we know if this paper is worthy of publication? Does it make any sense? Well, let's send it to an expert in the field and let's see what his opinion about it is. That's where you get peer review. Yeah, Francis Bacon is nature to be commanded must be obeyed. Therefore, you must know nature in order to. I mean, this is the great thing about Bacon, right? You've got to understand the world. You understand the facts, but not for the sake of understanding, so that you can change the world, so that you can alter nature, so that you can prove man's fate in nature, so that you can make the world a better place. There's no environmentalists during this time. Well, maybe they are, probably religious, probably conservative. But people are saying, no, we need to go out there and change nature to make human life better. And they understood that human life was not pleasant. I mean, disease and famine and war and hardship and poverty were everywhere. So here's this period of scientific discovery, of philosophical thinking, and people exchanging ideas and talking and debating and discussing. And what tool are they using? What tool are they using to discover all this? What tool are they using to debate? What tool are they using to try to identify truth? Well, the tool they're using is, of course, reason, whether they identify as such or not. And a lot of times they're using it in flawed ways, mainly the philosophers who are very, very rationalistic and in spite of also dabbling in science, very detached from reality. Descartes, kind of a primacy of consciousness. But this is a time where reason is shown to be efficacious. Reason is shown to be the way in which we understand the world. It is a time where all these thinkers are distancing themselves from authority. The authority of ancient books and the authority of the church. It doesn't matter what the Bible says. What matters is what I see. It doesn't matter what the Bible says. What matters is what I'm measuring. Science is what matters. Reality is my guide. These are implicitly, even if they don't identify them explicitly, this is what drives this period. And look, they were all mixed. Isaac Newton dabbled in all kind of mystical ideas and was religious in a kind of non-orthodox way. And he was an alchemist. All kinds of things he did. But he changed the world by discovering some of the rules by which the physical world works. And then discovering mathematical tools to help understand that world. But you think about the laws of motion, you think about his optics, you think about calculus. Here's the culmination of this age, and also the guy who sets off a new age. He has a foot in both, in the pre-Enlightenment and in the Enlightenment. He sets off the Enlightenment. He is the first Enlightenment thinker, together with John Locke, who's I think a little younger. But he's also the end of this era that starts with Francis Bacon of science, of discovery, of communication. What you get here is a connected world, a connected Western Europe, where ideas are being developed, thought through, discussed, debated, challenged. This is what Western civilization is. And the consequence of this is an enlightenment where these ideas now become more explicitly recognized. It's also called the age of reason, because reason becomes now, it's clear that what people are using is reason. It's clear, at least to some of the thinkers, that what we're challenging is mysticism, religion, faith. That is being put to the side. Not abandoned completely, because we don't have answers to all the questions we need, but put to the side at least. So, what you get here is religion being put to the side, a recognition of reason, and then following this art now, a recognition of the value of the individual. A recognition that starts in various places around Europe with different writings of different people and culminates again in another figure that starts us off into the Enlightenment, and that is John Locke. With the idea that individual life is sacred, that the individual is the important unity in reality. And now there's a philosophical defense, at least a weak one, but somewhat, of individualism, and a political defense of individualism. And this is Western civilization. 1500 to 1800 is the period that defines it. And what defines it is a discovery of really these two principles that lead to a third. So three principles that really are what Western civilization is. And anybody who embraces these three principles is embracing Western civilization. What are these principles? Reason, man's means of knowledge, man's means ultimately of survival and understanding of the importance, not fully, not completely, not until Ayn Rand, but at least to some extent of reason is how we understand the world, how we discover truth. Not books, not revelation, not Plato, but actually thinking about this world. This is how science is done. Inductive. Start with the facts of reality. And yes, math has a role, and deduction has a role. But ultimately, that all has to be tested in reality, reduced to reality. Reason is the way we discover truth, is our means for truth, is our guide to action. Before reason, bring everything, as paraphrasing Thomas Jefferson. And what matters, the entity that reasons is the individual. Groups don't reason, collectives don't reason. Oh, we can help each other, we can stimulate each other, we can challenge each other, we can review each other, we can critique each other, but at the end of the day, each one of us thinks for himself. And each individual has the capacity, it turns out, to reason, because suddenly people are coming out of the woodwork. It's not like Isaac Newton came from some famous family with some aristocratic background. No. Came out of nowhere, in a sense. It turns out that people from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of individuals, all kinds of people could be geniuses. But then a lot of non-geniuses could understand the geniuses, could learn from the geniuses, could contribute to the work being done. So you get this idea of the sanctity of the individual. The individual can reason. The individual can take care of himself, can take care of his life. And therefore can make choices for himself. And that leads directly to the idea of political freedom, political liberty. And that leads directly to the American Revolution, which is the revolution of the Enlightenment. It is the revolution of reason, individualism, and political freedom, capitalism. So, what Western civilization is, in other words, what made possible the wealth and the riches that we have surrounding us today, are the ideas of reason, individualism, and political freedom. Political freedoms unleash the individual to use his mind in pursuit of his own happiness, which leads to the creation of wealth and to trade and to culture and to production and to everything that we have today, everything that we associate with Western civilization, with the wealth and prosperity and success that we have. It's all a product of the freedom. It's all a product of reason, embodied in an individual with values striving towards achieving something in an environment of political freedom. And if that's what Western civilization is, it's not a particular geography. It's not a particular place and time. It starts in Western Europe. It starts in 1450 or something around there. But what it is are universal principles to guide any society towards prosperity, towards success, towards individual flourishing. And that's why, Japan is part of Western civilization. Yes, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore. You could argue that the better elements in China are Western. Chinese hate that. They despise that idea. And to the extent that China wants to be successful, it better double up on the Western civilization elements. Because they're universal. Without reason, individualism, and political liberty, one cannot maximize the potential of human beings, of individual lives, and the social connection network that we have. So, Western civilization is this core set of ideas. This is what I told them in Washington, D.C. when I was with all these conservatives, and they freaked out. Because to them, Western civilization is a place. And much more important than that, to them, Western civilization is what I consider the opposite, the anti-West, which is religion. So if you think about Western civilization, the process of getting civilized is a process of secularization. It is a process of diminishing the importance of religion, setting it aside, compartmentalizing it. Starting in the Renaissance, where suddenly art is no longer Christian art, necessarily expressing Christian values, but using Christian stories to express human values, individual values, secular values. You certainly see that with Michelangelo's early work. You see it with Caravaggio. We talked about that. You certainly see it in the Netherlands, where there's, almost all the artists, Vermeer and Rembrandt and Rubens, don't do much Christian art at all, Christian themes. Everything is secular. So it starts, in a sense, with the secularization of art, of aesthetics. Taking religion out of it. And Christians keep trying to bring it in. And of course, the Pope has a lot of money, so he has big commissions and gets people to do. But even when they do something that is religious, like the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, the figures are so secular, so powerful, so individuated. So you start with the secularization of art. And then the secularization of science. Science is completely put aside. Science contradicts religion. It contradicts it in methodology. Science connected to reality versus religion connected to revelation in ancient books. In every realm, so in every dimension, science contradicts religion. And the religionists knew it, that's why they fought it. And then they gave up because they couldn't keep up. Okay, so we took religion out of art, we took religion out of science. And then with the founding of America, we took religion out of politics. And the only realm in which religion stayed is in the individual's life. But even there, religion is starting to be taken out of morality, pursuit of happiness. And you have more and more thinkers in the enlightenment who are questioning religious Christian morality. Spinoza, who's at the early enlightenment, very, very, very beginning of the enlightenment. But the idea of individual rights, and ultimately the idea of the pursuit of happiness. Atheists in the French Enlightenment. The whole process of civilization, the whole process of Western civilization is a process by which we shed slowly but systematically the importance of religion from our lives. Civilization, Western civilization, is fundamentally secular. It is fundamentally based on reason, fundamentally based on the individual's right to pursue his own happiness, fundamentally based on political freedom. So, enemy number one of Western civilization, and I say here Western civilization, enemy number one of Western civilization is Christianity. It is the most ancient enemy. It is the most deep-rooted enemy. It is the enemy that is most likely, that keeps rearing its head, particularly in America. But it is the ancient one. What Christianity ultimately wants to do, they won't admit it, although Knowles admitted it. They want to drag us back to the Middle Ages. They want to drag us back to a pre-Western civilization. They want to drag us back to before there was such a thing as Western civilization, where religion dominates everything, where science is gone, muted, where religion is everything in the culture. He said he wants a culture of 1220. A culture of 1220, there is no science. There is no individualism. There is no political freedom. There are serfs, there are masters, and there is God. A pope and priests and monks in between. So enemy number one is religion. But it's not the only enemy, of course. And the enemies of the Enlightenment, the enemies of Western civilization, pop their heads up within the geographical space of Western civilization almost immediately. Yes, they said maybe we can reject Middle Ages like Christianity. But we should not and cannot reject its principles. How do you know that reason is efficacious? How do you know this science stuff is really real? How do you know we're connected to reality? So the attack on reason is fundamental to the enemies of Western civilization. Immanuel Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Marx, a part of that attack on science, an attack on the scientific method, an attack on reason, an attack on our ability to know truth, to know reality. And of course, it's never just that they attack reason, because you have to replace reason with something. And if you've given up on God, or if you haven't given up on God, but you at least recognize that philosophically, if you're a serious philosopher, you don't want to depend on God, then you need something instead of God. You need something to replace And you replace it with the collective, a collective. Pick and choose which collective. And of course, collectivism in every one of its forms, whether it's based on the proletarian, whether it's based on race, whether it's based on place of birth, whether it's based on anything. When the collective, the group, is more important than the individual, that is an attack on Western civilization. So communism is not a feature of Western civilization. It is a frontal attack on Western civilization. It is a rejection of reason, individualism, and political freedom. Fascism is not a feature of Western civilization. It doesn't arise from Western civilization. It arises from the Dark Ages. It's another devil from the Dark Ages coming up to attack Western civilization. In the name of revelation, in the name of collectivism, in the name of rejection of reason, in the name of rejection of political freedom. So the enemy of Western civilization are not part of Western civilization. The ideas that grew up in the West, not only in the West, some of them in the East, some of them other places, but they're not the ideas of Western civilization. They're the enemies. They reject the very foundations of civilization, and therefore they must be fought. Religion, mysticism, revelation of all forms, Platonic, secular, religious, must be fought. Collectivism, in all its varieties, must be fought. Altruism, in all its varieties, the idea of sacrificing the individual to fill in the blank, which is a feature of every collectivistic movement, must be fought. And of course, collectivism always ultimately leads to the negation of political freedom. So in this context, we can now look at the world and we can see woke and left-wing critical race theory collectivism, not Western civilization, must be rejected. New right, nationalism, a subordination of the individual to God, not Western civilization, not America, must be rejected. All the various forms of nationalism and socialism and communism, they're all anti-West. The only allies we as objectivists today have, the only allies, are people who are willing to stand by the ideas of the Enlightenment. They might not be perfect. They're certainly not objectivists. They certainly are wrong and flawed and evasive in certain realms. But the allies we have to have at least some respect for. Some respect for. And the more the better. Reason, individualism, political freedom, capitalism. To the extent that they don't on any one of those, they won't on the others either. And to the extent that they don't, they're our enemy. And that's how you judge. I consider somebody like Steven Pinker more of an ally than somebody like Jordan Peterson. Because Steven Pinker, even though he has a flawed, only partial understanding, stands on the side of reason, stands on the side of individualism, and stands on the side of political liberty. Not perfectly, far from perfectly. Lots of flaws. But at least he's on that spectrum. He's on that side. Jordan Peterson, truth is revealed, not on the side of reason. He might say he's an individualist, and in some of his presentations, he's very articulate about individualism. But at the end of the day, he has come clearly down on the side of collectivism, on the side of religious collectivism, nationalist collectivism, on the side of collectivism, and sided with the collectivists. And political freedom, Jordan Peterson's understanding of political freedom is no better than Steven Pinker's. I'll take Pinker, even though he's left. And this is the sense in which left and right don't mean anything. They're all anti-Western civilization. All right. So that's my shtick on Western civilization, what it is and who the enemies are. Its enemies are everywhere. There's very little left of an understanding and a respect and a willingness to fight for a real Western civilization. This civilization part of West is the result of all these ideas. It's the great art of the 1500, or 1450, all the way to 2000, to I don't know, maybe not 2000 because there's not that much art, but it's all the great art. It's the great poetry, it's the great novels, it's the great paintings, it's the great sculpture, the great music that came out of that era, 1500 and 1900, or to some extent into the 20th century. It's the individualistic expression that each of us manifests in our own lives. We all live different individual lives. We're not bromides. Collectivistic societies, bromides. We're still individualistic in some fundamental sense. It manifests in the unbelievable scientific achievements and now technological achievements, taking Francis Bacon's useful science, applied science, and turning it into the modern world, turning it into the technology we're using right now to do the show. This is Western civilization. The products of these ideas, the products of reason, of individualism, of political freedom. So, this is what we fight for. We are, I think, those of us who are followers of Ayn Rand's ideas, we are the defenders of Western civilization. It's sad that we're losing, but we are the defenders of Western civilization. We are the defenders of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment values are what matter in the end. Without the Enlightenment values that people like Yoram Chazoni and people like Jordan Peterson and people like certainly Knowles and Matt Walsh and many others on the right, and the entire woke leftist infrastructure, they all want to kill one thing. They all want to kill the Enlightenment. They're all united in hatred of the Enlightenment, in hatred of reason, individualism, and capitalism. That's the enemy. The enemy is everybody. It's not us. It's all of them. All right, let's take questions. Remember, goal for evening shows is 650. Really important that we make these goals. It's how I live off of this is the money that pays the mortgage. It really is. Not kidding. And we have a goal because I have monthly goals. I have an annual goal for the show and for my activities and for what I need. And 650 for the evening shows is kind of what we need in order to get to that monthly goal. Sometimes we exceed, sometimes we're below, but on average, we need to meet these goals. So I'd appreciate all the support that you can provide. And if you value what I do, if you value these history, intellectual history lessons, lectures, rants, whatever you want to call them, then please value for value. Value for value. Mark is asking, what is the current schedule for monthly one-on-ones? You've got to contact Angela. You should have, I think it's, you can do it at askyaron@yaronbrookshow.com, but you probably gotten emails from Angela in the past, my assistant, and just schedule with her. You definitely got time in August for one-on-ones. It's just a matter of getting on my calendar, and she's responsible for my calendar. To thank you, Mark, for the support, the monthly support that you do, very generous, and for the super chat here. But for any questions about one-on-ones, please contact Angela. And if you're not sure about her email address, then email me at yaron@yaronbrookshow.com. I can't give you a schedule here online, while we're talking. It's too complicated, but email. Email is the way to schedule these things. All right, Adam. Adam says, at this time, Western is redundant after an often misleading South Korea east of Russia, but has a more Western civilization. I say civilization, and I'm never misunderstood. Your opinion on just civilization. Again, I think that the value of Western is to root it in history. And I think it's important to root it in history. It's to rooted in the culture of Western Europe, of the Renaissance to Enlightenment to Industrial Revolution. That is what civilization today means and is. And we don't want to lose, and I think it's really, really important that we not lose that historical context and those historical links, because that historical links, right? Those historical links are what help us define what it actually means. We can, to some extent, look around the world today and say, okay, what's unique to South Korea and Japan and America and Spain and England and Israel, and what is unique to these places? Oh, political freedom, individualism. Look at the way they dress, look at the way they behave, look at the way they speak, and a respect for science, a respect for reason. Yeah, we can see that. But I think going back to the roots and the thinkers that made it possible, John Locke and the French and Scottish Enlightenment, and of course the thinkers that came before from the Renaissance on, super important. And that's why I like the term Western civilization. I don't care if people, offended by it, but I think Korea is part of Western civilization. West indicates the source, not its location today. All right, Doug, $50. Thank you, Doug. We're about $400 short of our goal, by the way. We got about 75 people watching, so what? $4 each, $5 each. All right, and you can do a sticker. You don't have to ask a question. You can do just a sticker, and we can get there. All right, please read and review this article for the good, the bad, and the ugly, ultimately passing your final judgment. It's called The Killing of Common Sense. Is it easier to find online if I just put in like The Killing of Common Sense? I'll find it. I will look for that. I will look for that. I'm curious now because I've written a long, long time ago about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in many ways, I think the whole point of the good, the bad, and the ugly is to kill the Western and to kill what's good in the Western and to kill kind of the individualism of the Western. I'll just give you one little tidbit. You know that nobody in the good, the hero in the good, the bad, and ugly doesn't have a name? Doesn't have a name? That tells you something, right? It's individualism. He's just a nothing. He's a good guy, but it's good as superficial and thing and meaningless. No names. Wasn't there a Western called The Man with No Name? I can't remember if that was a comedy or a real spaghetti Western. All right, Doug, I'm looking forward to reading it. I'll let you know what I think. Clark, also $50. Thank you. Did you watch some of Vivek's interview with Jordan Peterson? I have not, no. They were discussing Plato, and Vivek described how communism and collectivism are rooted in nihilism. As president, he may bring more intellectual tech types over to the right. Yeah, I mean, Vivek, I think, has a lot of good things going for him. He's intellectual. He's super smart. By far the smartest of all the presidential candidates. He's like, light years smarter than Trump or DeSantis or any of those guys. He's super articulate, super charismatic. he's an entrepreneur. He's done something with his life. He gets tech. He understands tech. He's well connected to that world. And by the way, I don't view bringing anybody to the right as a good thing. I consider the right bad, anti-Western civilization. The problem with Vivek is that he caters to the populists. He caters to the religionists. I don't know how religious he is, but he caters to them. And unfortunately, he's selling his soul to them. So I'm not sure by the time he becomes president what's left of his virtues. Because every time you say some of the stupid things that he says, he's selling a little bit of his soul to a bad ideology, a bad place. Now, it could be that he has to do that to win. But then if he wins, what happens then? I mean, look, of all the Republican candidates, as I said, he's the most intellectual. He's the smartest. He will bring the most. He will be the most interesting. But what's going to be left of him, of his good side, by the time he wins, if he wins? I'd like to see him. I'd like to see him do well in the primaries. I prefer Vivek on Trump any day. So, in spite of the fact that I despise much of what he says, I will take him over Trump any day. I also think that Vivek is playing a game. I don't think he believes everything he says. I know people who've met him and say he knows some of what he says is wrong, but he has to say it in order to win. Friend Hopper. Okay, we're still like $370 short, guys. So if anybody out there wants to do $100 or another few 50s or something like that, it would be really good if we could chip away at that goal and get us at least closer to where we need to be. That would be fantastic. What are the essentials of civilization? I haven't really thought about it, but my gut says privacy, trade, absence of force. Is civilization like capitalism in the mixed economy measured in degrees? Yeah, but I think, and you've identified some of the things: privacy, trade, absence of force, freedom. But it's more than that. It's culture, it's beauty, it's great books, it's great art, it's great music, and it's individual expression, individuals living their lives as an expression of their own values and their own ideas. All of that is civilization. Anti-civilization is conformity, grayness, collective everything, collective whatever, force, poverty, because lack of trade. Buy America is anti-Western civilization, right? Bring manufacturing back is a negation of division of labor and trade, a part of what makes civilization civilization. If you look at Roman civilization, trade and some freedom, some political freedom, some privacy, some respect for law, right? A system of law, that would be another one. Objective law would be another characteristic of civilization, or some kind of attempted objective legal system would be a part of civilization. Even the Chinese, had a legal framework, a social framework, ideas about beauty. So it has to be, civilization ultimately is the achievements. It's the achievements. It's the pro-human life achievements of a particular place. David says, never doubt the heroism of Doc Brook. Try to be more like him every day if being a hero is your goal. Well, thank you, David. I really, really appreciate that. I haven't seen you in a long time. It's years and years. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the support. Liam, Aristotle brought the ethics of self-realization and self-development, a be all you can be. How would you say Rand has built on that theme to make Western civilization even more robust for the next and final Renaissance? Well, I think the big part of it is that Ayn Rand makes that objective. She gives you the tools for it. She gives you objective tools grounded in reality and grounded in human nature, grounded in reason. So he might say, be all you can be, but how? How am I going to be all I can be? And Ayn Rand says, by living a virtuous life, by living a reasoned life, by pursuing reason, purpose, and self-esteem, by following, these virtues, by acting these virtues. That's how you achieve this be all you can be. So Ayn Rand actually breaks it down into practical tools to use and grounds it in reality, grounds it in rationality, grounds it in reason. She shows how you get what you ought to do from an is. And of course, she then articulates an entire philosophy that grounds reason and explains what reason is and how it works and what are its requirements, and then, of course, builds on that a political system, the only political system that is consistent and respects reason and egoism and self-realization. So she completes the project of Aristotle and the Enlightenment, both in epistemology, in morality, in ethics, and in politics. All right, thank you, Shazbot, $50. That's very generous, appreciated. Colleen, thank you. It's great to see you here. Also $50, really appreciated. Mary Aline, thank you. Let's see, who else did I miss? Darlene, thank you. Dave, thank you. And everybody else is asking questions. Stephen Harper, Jonathan Honig, Fred Harper, thank you to all you guys. Oh, Doug. Oh, wow. All right, Doug just did $100 song review. And this is a song review I think I can do right now, if you'll let me, right? And he's asking me to review the song Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. Now, it's $100. Thank you, Doug. So I do song reviews. Not, we'll see if this round is better. Doug is getting it off to a good start. I will do movie reviews, $500, and TV show reviews, $250. I still have to review a novelette. I'm going on a trip tomorrow. I'm hoping to read it then. And I also have to review Puss in Boots, which I've also downloaded now, and I'll watch it again for the second time on the flight. So I'll be reviewing it in the next few days. All right, but let's do Sound of Silence. And I'll do it now. And if you want more, Doug, then let me know. I mean, I think Sound of Silence is one of the most beautiful songs ever written. In popular music, in the last 100 years. I mean, it's a beautiful melody. The harmony of Simon and Garfunkel, the combination of their voices, is stunning. While it's hard to completely get what it all means. It's certainly the whole structure of the song and the way it's sung and the sound of music, the sound of silence, and just the quietness, the silence of the song, in a sense, is just so well integrated. The words and the music are just beautifully integrated. I really think it's one of the pinnacles of certainly, the last 60 years. It was written in the 1960s. Simon and Garfunkel generally, I think, are musical geniuses. I think their albums are some of the best popular music ever. There's a lot of their songs that I love, and I grew up on these songs, so they have a real special place in my heart. But of all those songs, Sound of Silence is probably the best integrated and most beautiful melody and harmony wise. If I will look at the lyrics again to see if I've got anything to say about the lyrics. But it doesn't really matter to me. I've said this before. Lyrics of songs are not that important to me, other than is the music conveying the emotion that the lyrics are conveying? And here, the answer is definitely yes. Yes, yes, yes. It's a great song to be listening to as a teenager. It fit into that mood of a teenager, the introspection of a teenager, the little bit, insecurity of a teenager. And it just elevated, just again, in terms of sheer beauty and musicality. And again, some of the amazing some of the most beautiful melody ever. So thank you, Doug, for reminding me of the song, although I watch it periodically. Oh, we got another one from Doug, another song. Song review compare the cover If Sound of Silence by Disturbed. Does this version show the meaning better? Change the meaning, please compare. Okay, so this one I'm gonna obviously have to, because I have no idea, never heard of Disturbed. So I will do a compare and contrast, and that'll give you an opportunity to review the lyrics again and say something about the lyrics as well. Thank you, Doug. That's great. Doug is basically, you got us over the 650 targets, so really, really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, Fred Harper. Is hierarchy of concepts, which is broader, civilization or culture, is there a difference between Western civilization and Western culture? Thanks for helping me chew this. I think I'm confused a little on the difference. Yeah, I mean, I might be too. I'm not sure I can articulate exactly what the difference is. I think the culture is a piece of the civilization. Civilization is broader. Civilization is more universal. Culture is a little bit more local. Culture relates primarily to achievements of, call it the spirit, achievements like art, ideas, philosophy, the way people interact with one another. Unless, I think, to material success. Civilization encompasses culture plus the material success, plus the success of wealth and prosperity and standard of living and quality of life, health and things like that. Whereas culture is more about the ideas that lead to that, the way people interact with one another, but primarily the ideas and the art and the art that they are producing and the philosophy that they're producing, the intellectuals that they are producing. I'll have to, let me give it more thought, but that is like my haven't thought about it off the cuff version or best answer. All right, James says, how does the primacy of existence give rise to the laws of logic? How does the primacy of existence give rise to the laws of logic? I mean, it doesn't. In the sense of rise, if you mean that it's embedded somehow in existence and it just appears to us, it's implanted in us. The laws of logic are an epistemological tools. They're the way our particular consciousness, or the way a consciousness, a reasoning consciousness, a volitional consciousness, identifies what is true and what is not in reality. So there are no laws of logic independent of consciousness. Laws of logic are the means by which consciousness identifies and discovers reality, truth, what's out there. So there's no intrinsic, there's no laws of logic somewhere out there that we need to discover them. We need to understand the way human consciousness works and how human consciousness identifies things of reality, and laws of logic are this achievement where we figure out, this is the way we figure out if this is true, and these are some ways in which we figure out what's false and how we identify truth and differentiate from falsehood. It's not socially constructed. The laws of logic were discovered by Aristotle. But they're discovered, they're methods of thinking discovered by. But they're not there. You see, Amir Hussein, who's on the chat, he buys into the dichotomy that exists in common philosophy, in most philosophy, which Ayn Rand rejects, that all knowledge is either intrinsic, it's there somehow, somewhere, or it's subjective or constructed by society. But no, knowledge is objective. It's neither out there nor arbitrarily, subjectively constructed by society. Knowledge is discovered. But to discover it, you need to understand how the human consciousness works and how it interacts with reality. And logic is only relevant for human beings. It's not relevant for a bat. A bat doesn't use logic. It doesn't discover logic. Laws of logic are not invented. They're discovered. It's a discovery of what works. How does human consciousness understand the world? By rules of logic. By these principles that are discovered. Not invented, not made up, discovered. But they're not there, they're not unearthed. They're in the nature of consciousness and reality. It's a tool, a human tool. It's not, laws of logic are not metaphysical. They're epistemological. Harper Campbell, how can you live in such an inefficient, anti-enlightenment place like Puerto Rico? Don't you want to spend your golden years in economic efficiency and abundance? Yeah, if I could afford to, I would. I'd much rather live, everything else held constant, in California or in lots of other places. But, I live, I live in a much higher standard of living here in Puerto Rico because I can afford to live in that standard of living, quality of life. And I create my own enlightenment right here in my home. And, the day will come when I will move from here, but can't afford to live with the kind of quality of life I want to live. Can't afford to support my enemies in a place like California or Texas or wherever. I would never live in Florida. And there are very few places I would want to live. But ultimately, if I had to go somewhere and taxes and money were not a concern, I would go to California. I still think it's the best place on planet Earth to live. I mean, not San Francisco, obviously, but like San Diego, hard to beat. Not denying metaphysics, embracing metaphysics, but knowing what is metaphysical and what is not. Some things are metaphysical, some things are not. All right, Michael says, and assuming everything is metaphysical, I'm relating to something in the chat, is rejection of reality. It's a misunderstanding, and it's a rejection of human consciousness, which, by the way, is part of reality. It's an existent and it has a nature. And the laws of nature, laws of logic pertain to the nature of consciousness and its relationship to reality. Yeah, you should read Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, where Ayn Rand differentiates between epistemology and metaphysics, and what is epistemological and what is metaphysical. Anyway, not my field anyway, so you should probably read that book to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure. Michael says, Western civilization has proved much harder to kill than both its advocates and enemies think. I thought the COVID tyranny was the beginning of the end, but we bounce right back. Well, it might be the beginning of the end, and you don't even know it. But yes, I think it's definitely by very, very, very difficult to kill. And that is because it's so pro-life, and people want to live. And they don't want to give it up, even though they don't understand it. They don't know what it is. They don't know how to defend it. They don't want to give it up because they don't want to give up life. Gail says, I love the idea of art changing the culture to benevolence. Yes. And it will again. Apollo says, I'm sorry, you know who you are. I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about, Apollo Zeus? But thank you for the £5. You're saying sorry to somebody. I don't think it's me. Even though a minority of intellectuals, this is Michael again, even though a minority of intellectuals pushed for the Enlightenment, you don't think it made the majority of Western population more conceptual, more rational? I don't know what a majority means. It certainly made more people conceptual and rational than probably ever before in human history, and probably more than today as a percentage of the population. I don't know if most. Hard to tell. If you actually read about the lives of the common man in the 19th century, 18th century, I don't know how conceptual or how rational or how they were, but certainly much larger percentage of the population than ever any other point in human history. And the attack on the Enlightenment has made people less rational and less conceptual. Austin says, what is the difference between socialism and corporations? Wow. Socialism is a political, economic system. Corporations are legal entities. One is a system. One is a particular form of organization. But there's nothing similar about them. They're in completely different categories. They're not in the same category. They're not in the same, what are you comparing here? In what sense are they similar? In what sense they're just different categories of things? You can compare socialism to capitalism, to fascism, to communitarianism, to anarchy, to other social systems. Anarchy is not really a system. But corporations you can compare those to partnerships, to limited liability partnerships, to different forms in which, or to nonprofits, to different forms of human voluntary organization. So they're not in the same category. Michael says, where did the thousands of pro-reason Enlightenment intellectuals go? They didn't train future generations of rational individuals. They did. But so did the anti-Enlightenment people, and the anti-Enlightenment people ultimately won in the battle on the universities. But the Enlightenment was fought throughout the 19th century at universities, still is, I think, to some extent, in our universities today, still being fought. But at the end, the people who were anti-Enlightenment had more power. I mean, France got dominated by the anti-Enlightenment during the French Revolution. The French Revolution was in the beginning a mixture of Enlightenment and anti-Enlightenment ideas, but ultimately was dominated by the anti-Enlightenment. So it was dominated by Rousseau, by the ideas of Rousseau, which were fundamentally anti-Enlightenment, and it led to setting back the Enlightenment in France for many, many years. In America did a lot better because America's revolution was a pro-Enlightenment revolution. It was a revolution that was consistent with the Enlightenment, and that's why America flourished in the decades and centuries came after. Aristotle against Plato. The Ren was consummated in Florence, but the courting went on since 1222 at Padua. Padua is the hotbed of studying Aristotle for centuries prior, to the Renaissance, God. To the Renaissance. Your analysis without this fact is bad. No, I don't think that's completely true. There is study in Padua, at the University in Padua. That's where Galileo was a professor. Padua was maybe the most important university in the world in the beginning of the Renaissance. But there was the hotbed of studying Aristotle in the 1300s was Paris. It wasn't Padua. What's his name? I forget. Something in Eloise. I forget his name. Was an Aristotelian scholar, but they had very little impact. They have very little influence, and they only studied a few of Aristotle's writings until Thomas Aquinas' era, until the mid 1300s. Most of Aristotle's writings were not known to the Western Europeans. They were known in what used to be Iraq or in Baghdad, but that had all been burnt. That was all gone. They were known. Abelard, thank you. Abelard is the figure in the University of Paris studying Aristotle before Thomas Aquinas. But they were known in Spain under the Muslims. So Aristotle's writings were mostly unknown in the West. They had a few fragments, a few pieces. But it wasn't until the Christians conquered Spain and found those libraries and translated the rest of Aristotle that you get a real revolution, a meaningful revolution. And that revolution comes in the guise of Thomas Aquinas. And yes, everything starts with Aquinas, not with Padua, but with Thomas Aquinas. But Thomas Aquinas, the idea of reason, the idea of rationality, the ideas of Aristotle, the idea that this worldly ideas, all brought into the Catholic Church by Aquinas. But they don't manifest in reality, in human achievement, in civilization, until the 1400s, until the Renaissance. The Renaissance is made possible by Aquinas and by his spreading of Aristotle's ideas, his legitimization of Aristotle's ideas, his embrace of Aristotle's ideas, and therefore their being embraced by the Catholic Church in perverse ways often. But at least they're there, and the better people can see them and find them and discover them. I don't think Padua is as important as you think it is. I think Aquinas is. And yes, I should have probably started with Aquinas. But I started with its manifestation in the beginning of a civilization. There was no civilization before the Renaissance. There was a hellhole with a few bright lights in it. Padua, Paris, Aquinas, a few people here and there, and a few places of light in basically complete and utter darkness. Civilization starts with the Renaissance. Austin, is corporatism better than capitalism? No, corporatism, first of all, there is no such thing as corporatism. What people refer to as corporatism is cronyism. And cronyism is not unique to corporations. Cronyism is it's unique to pressure groups, corporations being one of many pressure groups. Corporatism, so it's cronyism. Cronyism is characteristic of a mixed economy, and a mixed economy is by far inferior to capitalism. Capitalism is the only consistently good moral, political, economic system. MP creates, sending on behalf of friend Harper, does metaphysical just mean exists? Metaphysical relates to that which exists. And really, metaphysics doesn't have a lot, right? There's not a lot to say about metaphysics. Existence exists, causation, things are what they are, and they act based on their own nature. Those are the three axioms of metaphysics. They're all basically the same thing looked at from a different perspective. And it says things are what they are. They behave the way the way their nature dictates they behave. That's it. It's not, it's not a particularly robust field. I mean, people want to imbue it. You see, the intrinsicists who believe the truth is out there, right? In a sense of conceptual truth is out there. And all human consciousness needs to do is find it, and just it imprints itself on our mind. Then there is no epistemology. Epistemology is out, and everything becomes metaphysics. But for objectivism, for Ayn Rand, there is a process to discover truth. And that's epistemology. That means that there's an active consciousness. It's not just that the consciousness, boom, absorbs truth. Consciousness needs to act in order to discover truth. And that's very different. William Anthony, how do you feel about historical fantasy fiction? I find it hard to get into Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones just because is life about either being a soldier or Machiavellian politician? I mean, I like historical fiction, and I like some fantasy, not a lot. I kind of like it in a movie or TV series like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, but I couldn't read the books. I wouldn't have the patience for it. It's too... I agree with you in terms of it's too much about being a soldier, being a politician, and too Middle Ages, kind of too shallow, too... But it's also, I find magic just frustrating, right? Why can they do this and they can't do that? Why can't he just make it boof, go away? Why can't he just win the war by killing all the enemy with a wave of his hand? Why does magic end here and not over there? I find the whole idea of fantasy very troubling and difficult and challenging. Why are there only 5 dragons? And why can't they make more dragons? And if they make more dragons, why can't the dragons do this and that? And why can't the magician just blow up all the bad guys? And what are the laws? What are the rules? What are the metaphysics? What are the metaphysics? But I like historical fiction. I like historical fiction a lot. But historical fiction doesn't have that soldier Machiavellian. And look, I don't mind dealing with soldiers and politicians if there's something to it. There's a point to be made. If it's just about the bloodshed. And one of the things to Game of Thrones' credit is, at least in the TV series, the episodes have a theme. They are trying to convey something, and it's not just Machiavellian violence. There is more to it sometimes than that. And those are the best shows. There was a whole season of Game of Thrones that was basically about the relationship between religion and political power. And it was very powerful and very well done and very on point. John, thank you for the support. Really appreciate it. Let's see. Hopper Campbell. Is Germany today still an evil country? Their silent majority must be still deeply Kantian. No, I can't think of Germany as an evil country. It's a country where people are producing, where people are basically free, where people are thinking for themselves. No, I mean, if they were so deeply Kantian, then they would be in the Dark Ages, but they're not. They certainly had cultural Kantian elements, and they certainly have Kantian influences, but they're not Nazis, and they're not, complete mindless collectivists. That's not Germany of today. Mark says, it's going to be a huge metaphysical task to protect Western rationalism. Superstition seems to be gaining everywhere. How can we meet the challenge? The only way to meet the challenge is to appeal to the people who are still rational in the world and to argue against irrationality and try to convey and to convince them to move to your side and do it in as as much as possible, supporting the Yaron Brook Show and helping me expand it and grow it so that we can influence more people, gaining a better, deeper understanding of these ideas so you can go out there and help me change the world and help me protect Western civilization. Stephen Pettit, do you have a favorite jazz standard? The kind that Tony Bennett or Frank Sinatra sang? Oh, God. I mean, I have a lot of Frank Sinatra songs that I love. A lot of the standards, a lot of the Cole Porter. I love Cole Porter and a lot of his music. I'm not familiar with it enough to name songs, but if you played them to me, I'd recognize them. I certainly, I love the Frank Sinatra standards. I've listened to them many, many times, but I can't retain the names, the differences, my favorites, not in my easy to produce subconscious. But yeah, they're wonderful. Particularly Sinatra. I just love the way he sings. Mark Thomas, to clarify, it will be a huge task to uproot several thousand years of bad metaphysics. Good metaphysics is not the human default. Don't let the crazy school steal humanity. Yeah, to life, l'chaim. Absolutely. We need to fight. We need to reinvigorate the enlightenment. Whoops. Mark says, want to know if you'd be interested in the work of Dr. Pat Churchland. She pioneered work of reason through lens of neuroscience, important for objectivism. Yeah, I don't know anything about it, but it sounds interesting. I'll look into it. Finally, we've got Apollo Zeus. I hear people say teleological, and I think they mean epistemological. No, teleological means, for purpose, right? For purpose. Steven says, see the revival and upgrade of Alma Deutsch's 2015 opera Cinderella at the San Jose Opera from last November with the composer conducting. I will put the YouTube link in the comments after the show. Thank you, Steven. I'm looking forward to watching that. Mark says, your gripes on magic fantasy remind one of religion and its metaphysical. Why must we believe or do X, Y, Z? What is with the metaphysics indeed? I don't know if that's a question. Yes. But that's magic. And fantasy, it's inconsistent by definition, and that makes it frustrating. All right, guys, I am going to go to bed, and I've got a very early morning flight in the morning. I'm flying to Colorado. I'm giving a talk on Thursday night in Aspen for a fundraiser for my alma mater, the Technion, the Israel Institute of Technology. I don't know why they invited me, why they think I'm going to help them raise money, but they're paying me a lot of money to come, so I'm doing it. It'll be fun. And then my one of my sons is coming out to Colorado, and we're going to spend the weekend driving around and seeing the beautiful mountain scenery of Colorado. I'll try to do shows on and off during our travels, during our movement from one hotel to another and enjoying the scenery there, and I'll do some shows, but I'm not committing to anything specific. I'm just saying there will be shows, we will be doing them, and it will be fun. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to Colorado. I'm looking forward to seeing, well, I don't know if I'll see any of you, but have a great time. I will see you on a future show, probably Thursday. Probably do a show Thursday, I don't know, noon Mountain Time, something like that. So I'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. You were great fundraising on the Super Chat. And see you soon. Bye, everybody. Oh, don't forget, if you want to support the show, yaronbrookshow.com/support. You can become a monthly contributor, or Patreon. Patreon is great as well.